Hi, everybody. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is a pretty complicated topic. I've spent probably years of my life talking about it, so I'm going to try to distill that into 5 minutes and also try not to nerd out too much in that time, so bear with me a little bit with that. So El Nino is something we talk about a lot, and I think we do talk about it a lot kind of in terms, it sounds like there's something looming right off our coast, which is absolutely not the case. So I have some graphics to kind of explain it a little bit more. It's complicated, but basically what we're talking about when we're talking about El Nino is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. It is a large-scale climate phenomenon that is cyclical. It involves El Nino, La Nina, and neutral years. But what's actually happening is we're measuring sea surface temperatures off the coast of Ecuador and Peru. It's a long way away from us. So that's actually what we're talking about when we're talking about El Nino. It's a phenomenon where we have the trade winds coming off of South America. Sometimes they're a little stronger. That's going to push a lot of that warmer water farther towards the Western Pacific. That's going to make it a little bit colder, especially off the coast of Peru. That's a La Nina year. Other years, we've got a little bit less of those trade winds. It's not going to push those cold waters away as much, and we get warmer waters right off the coast of South America, and that means we've got an El Nino year. That's what we're talking about this year. But that becomes really important when you see those sea surface temperatures and how they impact storms, how they impact low pressure systems, and kind of the global weather system. We talk a lot about sea surface temperatures, especially with storms. We talked about a hurricane earlier this year that was heavily impacted by those extra warm waters that made its way towards us here. So that's what we're kind of talking about when we're talking about El Nino, La Nina. Kind of two fun graphics on how those actually happen. It is a very small scale thing that we're actually measuring. It's only about 100 miles off the coast of South America that we're actually measuring, but it has global implications, and that's why we talk about it so much. So it's complicated, and I'd love to talk about it more, but when we talk about this, we're talking about El Nino and La Nina. They're two sides kind of the same coin. So this year, what we're actually going to be seeing is that El Nino year. The Climate Prediction Center has come out with its expectation that we are 95% sure it is going to continue to be El Nino conditions right off the coast of Peru. What does that mean for us, though? Because that's a long way away from us, and it does have global implications. But here on the West Coast, it means that we do have those weaker trade winds right over the equator. It means warmer waters, which means we're going to be seeing more and stronger storms right in that area. That means we've got a low pressure system. I told you it was going to be very complicated. But a lot of steps later, that impacts us here on the Central Coast. That semi-permanent low pressure right off the coast of Peru, kind of see that where that above normal sign is, means that there's going to be more activity in that area. More activity means more chances for us to get some of the remnants of those storms up here on the Central Coast. So typically we see a little bit above average rainfall in an El Nino year with that kind of big old low pressure right off the coast. So that's kind of the basics of El Nino. I don't want to bore you guys too much because I could talk about it forever. But why you guys actually asked me here was, what does this mean for us here on the Central Coast? We're coming off of a record year for rain here on the Central Coast. And I think I'm asking myself, and I know a lot of other people are asking, are we going to see that again? And before I get too far into this, no, that's not what's expected over the next couple of months. But I am expecting slightly above normal rainfall for this year. Typically, we see about 20 inches of rainfall a year. Mainly that all falls in the winter. We haven't seen rain for months at this point, typically at this point of the year. This year's been a little bit different though. But that low pressure is going to be sitting right to our south, which means that we do have more chances for these rain systems. It is just one of the many, many, many factors that really impacts us here on the Central Coast. But I do expect us to see more than that typical 20 inches of rain. I don't love climate normals anyway. I don't think they work really well for us here on the Central Coast because we live in extremes, but I do think we're going to be seeing more rain than we typically see in a winter. With that low pressure sitting to our south, we're also expecting to see a lot more rain across the south portion of the United States as a whole. So it's not just us here on the Central Coast, it's across the entirety of the region. And this is what the Climate Prediction Center is suggesting. I think they're a little bit on the low side of what we could actually be seeing when we've been seeing the climate patterns that are setting up here on the Central Coast. I'd knock us up a couple of points on here, but I do not get paid by the Climate Prediction Center, so my opinions aren't on that one. But I do think we are going to be staying with this above normal area of rain. But it's complicated, as I've said a dozen times at this point. And so I'm going to quote one of my favorite people, my boss, our chief meteorologist, Dave Hovde, and he explains it kind of as this football example. We're heading into the season, so it's a good time to talk about it. So if we say that having a heavy rain year is like winning the Super Bowl here on the Central Coast, maybe not as much as we won the Super Bowl last year here on the Central Coast, kind of drop that a little bit. But El Nino is like drafting the number one player in the first round of the draft. It helps. But as we all know, looking at our fantasy lineups, it doesn't mean we're going to win the Super Bowl. So that is just one of many, many other setup situations that we're continuing to see. Another one that they did not ask me here to talk about is the semi-permanent low pressure in the Aleutian Islands up in Alaska. That's also setting up. That's another thing that kind of brings us a couple more of those atmospheric river phenomenons and brings us into those slightly above normal areas of rain. So everything is pointing towards that slightly above normal threshold. We're coming off of also a rare triple dip La Nina. Typically, El Nino, La Nina switches every 1 to 2 years. It was the first time here on the Central Coast in record-breaking history that we'd seen 3 in a row. So hopefully we're going to be seeing a little bit less than we saw last year, but overall, more rain is expected. I hopefully was able to stay within time vaguely with that, but if anybody has any questions, I'll be around.